major thread that connects me till that first POR as a coordinator in Visage and at Elect Club in C5 to me becoming co-cast. The common thread is that I really loved doing what I did, right? So I became a coordinator. I wanted to continue being a part of that team, both for the sake of that amazing team that you're a part of, and because I loved the work that we actually did, right? So I put for super coordinator, and then I wanted to go even further ahead, right? And that's how I became a core. And then as a core, you get to see everything from a different vantage point. And me being a part of the Envisage team, which is at an intersection of Shastra and C5, I got to see two major parts of the co-curricular sphere, which made me realize that maybe I'm not that far off from becoming a secretary as I used to think I was. So while this was not a completely planned out route, just going step by step made me realize that I'm not that far off from, being one of those secretaries, which I used to look at and be completely starstruck in my first years. Oh my God, how can someone talk to so many people at a time? Oh my God, how can someone, write a manifesto and then like campaign in hostels and do all of this, seemingly very, very painful, which is actually very painful, but yeah, work all, yeah, right. So, but when you go step by step, you do realize that it is not that far away from you that you can actually get there. It's just one more step ahead.
Welcome back to yet another episode of Instea Unfiltered. For today's episode, I'm joined by Pravallika and Isha. So, Pravallika and Isha, if you guys could introduce yourselves, when you were in Instea, what degree program you did, and what you're doing now. We'll start with Pravallika first and then Isha.
Yeah. Hey guys, Pravallika here. I joined Instea in 2015. I did a dual degree in civil engineering and graduated in 2020. I'm currently working as an associate at a management consulting firm. Um, in Instea, I was largely involved in the tech sphere. So I was a part of Elect Club in C5, and I was also a core for Envisage and Shastra. And I ended up being the co-curricular affairs secretary in the academic year 2019-2020. Yeah, off to you, Isha.
Hey everyone, I'm Isha and I was in Instea between 2012 and 2017. And I was in the integrated MA program, the 5-year MA program. While I was at Instea, I had a few other, I guess, minor PORs, but I was pretty involved with T5E as a correspondent, as an editor, and then as the exec editor. I think that's. Oh, and I'm currently doing a PhD in sociology at UC Irvine.
Cool. So maybe for the first part of this podcast, what we can do is really set the stage for what it was like when you first entered Instea, and then work our way up towards when you chose to, contest for COCAS and then apply to become T5E Executive Editor, respectively. So when you first entered Instea, did you have any idea about what you wanted out of Instea, like what you wanted to experience while you were there? And did you know very early on that you wanted to take up a prominent leadership role? Pravallika?
I can go first. Yeah. So coming into Instea, I did have some expectations, right? I had read all about, okay, what does IT Madras have? Oh, it has so many extracurriculars. It has all these clubs and, the usual. And back in those days, as it was common in back in those days, I did all of this research on Quora and all. But so I did have a certain expectation. But what I really did not realize or could not fathom was the amount of talent that comes into Instea, right? And that's when I realized that, okay, I am someone who is kind of introverted and who kind of shies away from, any sort of public attention and all, because you do not get this kind of a spotlight ever in your life before Insta. Even if you have served as a school head captain or whatever they call it, it's a very, very different, kind of a spotlight as compared to what you get in Insta. So I had never imagined that. So while I did have certain expectations where I wanted to wanted to participate in everything, do everything, be everywhere, I definitely did not act on it because of the mentioned reasons, right? So even though I was very interested in music, etc., I saw all these other amazing people who were already good and well trained in music, and I just got intimidated and I gravitated more towards tech clubs, etc. And coming to the leadership aspect, like I had mentioned multiple times now, since I was introverted, like standing up and speaking in front of hundreds of people was not something that I imagined that I would ever do. So if I just take the, expectations of what I would do and what I should be of the first year Pravallika, it's extremely different from what I actually ended up doing. Not that I have any regrets about it, but it's just very different. And what I feel like is that it's a process. And personally, the way I went about this was I ended up doing whatever I liked at that moment of time in my journey in NC. So and even if it looks now that looking back, even though if it makes a lot of sense retrospectively, it was not a planned path of any sort where I thought I would do X to get Y and then become a Z. So that's about my journey in the POR landscape of Insta.
I see.
Yeah,
And what about you, Isha?
I can relate to a lot of this. But one point of contrast is that I had zero ideas or plans when I entered MC. I didn't know what to expect. My program was a very unusual one and was not as universal, as well known, as packed with expectations and that kind of pressure as the BTech and dual degree programs are. So yeah, I didn't know what to expect. It was a very unusual program structure. So I came in with that kind of mindset, and I'm generally a little absent-minded. So I didn't do much research. I didn't make I didn't make like particular plans. And yeah, when I came in, I can relate a lot to feeling shy and introverted, and I wasn't very confident. I had a lot of stage fright, and I still do. So the thought of sort of participating in any kind of activity that involved putting yourself out there did not strike me. I actively stayed away from most of those things. And yeah, I think I found myself gently getting into things that involved writing, or like things where I basically didn't have to stand up and speak or act or anything like that. And I was very, very into attending the Shastra lecture series. So I joined the lecture organizing team. And I think few more things, like I remember being part of the Spell Bee team and being called for that at Sarang. T5E, I didn't know about T5E that much in my first year, but some of my classmates had joined as correspondents. So I applied in my second year, I think. Yeah, I think I joined as an editor first and not as a correspondent. See, I don't even remember. This is why I'm so absent-minded. But yeah, I think I was an editor first, then I became a correspondent. And the idea of applying for the leadership role of like being an executive did not apply to me, did not strike me at all. I ended up taking it in very strange circumstances, and I was very sure that I was absolutely unsuited to the role when I started. So it was definitely not a planned journey. I had no ambitions of being, in any kind of leadership role while I was at Instea in that sense. And yeah, I agree with like the sense of just exploring things, just seeing where things lead, not having everything meticulously planned, because a lot of times when you do that, you also sort of remove yourself from getting access to things you may not have planned, or like going out of your comfort zone. So over planning can be sort of detrimental in its own way. So I'm glad I didn't plan to that extent, I guess. Yeah.
You guys have participated in so many different PORs in your freshie year, but ended up at the top of the verticals in the COCAS space and in T5E by the time you got to your final year. So and neither of you had the explicit intention of taking on, that sort of a leadership role. So, like, help us connect the dots between how you got from there to that leadership role. So, did you really enjoy the first POR? If you draw the lines back from COCAS and draw the lines back from exec ed to your fresh year, what was that first POR in that vertical? Um, did you like it? And were there role models within that space who encouraged you to keep going?
Yeah. So for me, I guess it's like in my first year, I volunteered at both the fests, right? And I did random stuff basically. But what I ensured that I did was I just ensured that I was everywhere. I saw everything, right? And I tried to get a flavor of everything to get a understanding of okay, what to do next, right? And I remember seeing the Envisage show on Shastra at Shastra that year on Shastra Devan, and I remember being astonished by it. That something so wonderful could be put together completely by a bunch of students, second years for that matter, largely, right? So for me, that was just astonishing, and I wanted to be a part of something like that, right? And I saw that there was this huge team which seemed to be very well bonded, and like there was this huge camaraderie, right, which I wanted to be a part of. And so that was the main driver, and I became a part of the team as a coordinator. And and like you said, Niharika, the major thread that connects me till that first POR as a coordinator in Visage and at Elect Club in C5, to me becoming co-cast, the common thread is that I really loved doing what I did, right? So I became a coordinator. Wanted to continue being a part of that team, both for the sake of that amazing team that you're a part of, and because I loved the work that we actually did, right? So I put for super coordinator, and then I wanted to go even further ahead, right? And that's how I became a core. And then as a core, you get to see everything from a different vantage point. And me being a part of the Envisage team, which is at an intersection of Shastra and C5, I got to see two major parts of the co-curricular sphere, which made me realize that maybe I'm not that far off from becoming a secretary as I used to think I was. So while this was not a completely planned out route, just going step by step made me realize that I'm not that far off from, being one of those secretaries, which I used to look at and be completely starstruck in my first years. Oh my God, how can someone talk to so many people at a time? Oh my God, how can someone, write a manifesto and then like campaign in hostels and do all of this, seemingly very, very painful, which is actually very painful, but yeah, work all. Yeah, right. So, but when you go step by step, you do realize that it is not that far away from you that you can actually get there. It's just one more step ahead. So I guess, yeah, one step at a time.
Right. And Isha,
Yeah,
you were
that's
mentioning that you were actually reluctant to take on the role that you eventually ended up taking. So what were the circumstances surrounding all of that?
yeah. So maybe I can start by doing this backwards. Yeah, in my fifth year, like you both know this, fifth years, final years are just really busy times. You're worried about lots of things. So I had to work on my MA thesis. I wanted to apply for PhD programs. There's like too many things happening. So I didn't think that I would be suitable for the role, and I didn't think I would be able to give enough time to it. And I did not think of myself as a leader in any way at all. But as it happened that year, there were no suitable candidates who applied for the executive post. In fact, I think there were no candidates who applied. And Raghavi, who was the previous executive, like she had done an amazing job with her tenure, and she was really looking for someone to take on the role. So she asked me, and she asked a few more people if we would consider it. And I think I said I wouldn't be the right person a few times, but then there was really no one else for the job. And I was very attached to T5E because I'd been working there for 2 or 3 years before that. So I was like, okay, I will figure this out. And that's how that started. And I did find that like from the first second of like being part of that role, I think the very first thing I had to do was go to the admin department, and the previous team came with me to sort of introduce me to everyone in the office who I needed to know, to like fill whatever forms I needed, to tell me the procedures for reimbursements and that kind of stuff. That was the first thing. And the second thing was to select my team. And I think most of my hesitations melted away when I was faced with the task. Like I really threw myself into it. I seriously loved it from the first second. I had lots of ideas, had a lot of energy, and then it was just really hard for me to not give all of my time to T5E because that's what I felt like doing. I really just wanted to spend 100% of my time because I enjoyed it so much. And so it was a surprise, right? Like I would never have known if I had gone with my instinct there. But yeah, working backwards, I have remembered that I was an editor before I was correspondent. So in my second year, I applied to be an editor. And you asked about like role models. I'm still very good friends with everyone who I've worked with in my first couple of years at T5E. I still count all of them as very, very good friends. So I think in my first year when I was not at T5E, Purna was the exec ed. The year after that, when I joined as editor, Vishwa was the exec ed, and my co-editors were Lisa, Shilpa, and Arun. And they are all very, very good friends of mine. And I had a really, really good time being the editor that year. After that, I think I didn't join T5E for 1 year, and then I joined Raghavi's team as a correspondent. And each experience was very different. Like being an editor, being a correspondent, and being an exec ed, they were just completely different experiences, and all of them were very, very nice in their own way. Yeah, did I answer the question or did I forget something?
Yeah. No, you did. And I think that's one of the unique things about T5E as a POR. I first of all don't think, especially when you get passionate about the work you do, you stop seeing it as a POR, whether it's T5E or Shastra
Yes,
or
so true.
C5 or any of those things. But also that, especially in that vertical, it wasn't as hierarchical as most PORs tend to be. But no, I think now we've really set the stage for freshie Pravallika and freshie Isha, and how they became co-cast in T5E Exec Ed. But what I want to now focus on is really the process of applying. So now you've basically made up your mind that this is something that you can do or you want to do. But there's still a election process and a selection process for both of you respectively before you ended up taking on those leadership roles. So for Pravallika in specific, I know it's a feat of courage to first admit to yourself that being an elected representative is something you can do and you want to do. It's a whole other feat of courage to start planning out an election campaign. So just walk us through what that process was like. So how did you break this to your friends? How did you put together a team? What were the sort of challenges you faced? And most importantly, what I want to highlight is that, when you don't take on like a huge leadership role in Instea, it's very much possible to live within your own little bubble of friends or a small POR group. But when you take on such a leadership role, you're really putting yourself out there front and center in Instea. And especially when you are contesting for an election, not only are you putting yourself out there, you also are asking for people's votes. And being a woman in an institute with such a skewed gender ratio, it was no longer optional for you to be ensconced in Sharavati. Now you were very much putting yourself out there and asking for the acceptance of this whole other part of Instea that, we haven't interacted with at such a scale. So what was that like?
Yeah. So to answer the first part of your question, right, which is, yeah, I mean, you've made the decision, but how do you go about, getting it done actually? So, a part of the answer to that also is an answer to the previous question, right? Which is, being for 4 years in the sphere, I had made some really, really good friends, both amongst peers, juniors, and seniors as well. Some of the seniors and peers that I've made friends with in as a part of Envisage, C5, or even the Shastra core teams, they still continue to be one of my best friends even now, and like mentors that I look forward to, that I look up to, and reach out to in case even if I need some advice today, right? So the people that you meet and the kind of friends that you make, they become your biggest support system going into this, right? Because even if you have somehow sort of put together the confidence and courage, you still need a little bit of, a push and a validation, and
So
that
true.
and to really know that someone actually believes in you, and that has to come from your
Yeah.
immediate support system, right? So for me, I definitely had that in my team, in my co-core, and in the course whom I had worked with before, and all the people that I'd worked with as a part of whatever club I was a part of, and all of that, right? So I think that's the first and the most important part of the process. And once you've got the people sorted out, just the fact that you're going, so again, right, the next part of the whole thing is having a vision and the manifesto and all of those, all of the content specific things, right? So basically, for me, at least for me, the whole decision of the fact that I wanted to contest for the elections and that I wanted to see myself as a secretary came from the fact that I had a certain vision, and I wanted to do certain things that I could not, I could not do as a code, and I saw the potential for them. So that was the whole reason I wanted to contest in the first place. So for me, just so the content essentially was already there. We just needed to put it together in a beautiful format, in a manifesto, video manifesto, and all of that. And now the third part of putting yourself in the spotlight. Now, even though I had been a core of a relatively bigger team, right? Envisage is the biggest team in Shastra. It has around 40, it had 40 coordinators in my year, 10 super coordinators. So that's a good big team of 50 people. So that did give me one type of confidence, right? Because every time you're conducting a full team meeting, it becomes an exercise in public speaking for you, right? So that
Yeah.
did, so that did give some sort of confidence, but I had not imagined how it would be to put yourself out there, and build this brand called Pravallika, and make everybody believe that, hey, this brand is good, you know what, you should vote for this. So that was an extremely different, uh, extremely something that I had not imagined of being able to do. But I think the first two, the fact that I believed I had a strong vision and I had the content, and the second, that I had a really great support system, made up for the third fact, where which gave me the confidence to put me out there, which gave me the courage to put myself out there, right? Because I had friends who used to walk with me in the corridors, go corridor after corridor while I was campaigning in each and every wing, right? And who would give me feedback, hey, you know what, you shouldn't have said this, you should have done that instead of this, and all of that. And I would be okay. I would, and just the fact that there were so many people who were putting so much effort along with me, that itself makes you give some sort of a validation and some confidence, right? That okay, maybe if so many people are doing this for you, then maybe you might just be good at this. So you know what, just try it out, just have some faith in yourself, right? So that's one end of the whole process. And then there's this whole other thing, right, where putting out yourself in the spotlight also means that there's so much attention, and that's not easy to deal with. Even after becoming the secretary, just the fact that your name is listed on some Instea website with your photo and all, that used to give me a lot of anxiety, which made me feel like, okay, maybe everybody knows me now, everybody is seeing me, and I need to behave myself. I need to, constrain or contain how I behave, and like condition all of that, right? But again, you just learn it on the go. That's what I realized, that once and mainly because I was passionate and I had that people's support, all of this, gets managed by the first two things. And so, yeah, that was mostly about my journey. I think I answered your question, right,
No, no, no.
Niharika?
Yeah. So basically, I think that's a really good way to look at it, because your decision to contest for elections was not so much that you wanted to be a leader. It was actually because there was a certain vision that you wanted to execute, and by the time you got to that decision, you felt equipped to do so because of all the experience that you had amassed. And it's always nice to have a solid support system who confirms that, yes, just the way you think you're fit for this role, I also think you're fit for this role. And you had it on a very large scale. It wasn't just your support system. You then had to convince all of Instea that you were the right person. But then Isha and I, the experience that we had was a little different, because it was a selection process, not an election process. So we were spared the grief of convincing thousands of people that we were the right person for the job. We only had to convince ourselves, which was not easy. And then maybe, a pool of the interview panelists and the SLC speaker, which was maybe about as political as that process got. But I think the T5E Exec Ed role is very nicely complementary to the elected rep role, because you're in a position where you're meant to hold them accountable. And if you look at the legacy of T5E in Instea, it's had so many female executive editors, while the executive wing, which is composed of all the secretaries, has almost always been predominantly male. And I find that very interesting that the dynamics ended up being that way. And a lot of the, say, political happenings often happen behind closed doors. They happen in the boys' hostels. Women don't have access to that. And that affected both of you in very different ways, I'm sure. But Isha, because your primary role, or one of your primary roles, was keeping abreast of all of that, how did you navigate all of that? How did you make a space for yourself in that world?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, because I think every exec ed has had a very different approach to this, and I don't know if mine was the right one. I think to a large extent it might be, shaped by our personalities or the way we approach our role. In my case, I think I had a very clear sense that I should not try to get involved in politics. Like, I know that maybe some executives may think it's necessary or correct to be involved, or like maybe would think of like engaging in some kind of power brokering, or like making some kind of deals, or like all of that. I think I completely stayed out of it, which could be due to my complete ignorance. Like, I didn't know how these things worked. I didn't know where to, like what the access points were. But more importantly, I think I had a strong sense that the media body should not be part of these processes. It should be outside of them, and it should report on them. And so I think we did have a few requests from EW members to sort of publish their points of view, or like devote some space to their demands, or their whatever they wanted to put out there. And I remember being very against this. Like, I had a fairly good relationship with the EW. There were a few things we did not agree about. And there were a couple of times where I was asked to explain myself, or pulled up in front of the SLC to sort of defend some decision or the other. But yeah, I think this is one thing that did come up very regularly, is that the EW wanted me to write certain things in a certain way, or to give them column space on a regular basis. And I remember just being against that on principle. I felt that the EW should either, put out their own material in their own space, which they had enough resources to do. But I thought that whatever reporting is being carried out on the EW or the EW's activities should probably be done by correspondents who aren't part of the EW. And this is something that executives have differed on, and it's not like we all have strong disagreements with each other. Like, I think now it's much more the norm to work with the EW to sort of exchange favors, or to like exchange certain types of information, or column space and things like that, which is perfectly fine. Like, these things change over time, and the nature of the EW has also changed quite a lot in the time, like between when I entered Instea and today. Like, it has become much more explicitly political. there are many more checks and balances on T5E, and some of them are politically motivated. Now the executive has to be ratified by the SLC, which was not so much of a painful process earlier. So now if the SLC does not like a particular executive, it is possible for them to sort of place a lot of barriers in the executive's way. So things have changed a lot. And so the ways of dealing with the EW, or the relationship the executive has with the EW, has necessarily had to change and evolve over time. But yeah, in my case, it was not like a particularly conflict-based relationship. There were things we disagreed on, there were things we agreed on. I don't think I was great friends with anybody from the EW either. Like I didn't have that much of a relationship in that way. It was just, we would report on the elections, we would have interviews with people, we would have these soapbox recordings and things like that. I think it was basically a very professional relationship, which, yeah, I think.
So would you agree that
if
I framed it in that way, that hey, you're in Sharavati, you most of the times don't have a clue about what's going on there. But this is one of the primary roles, even if you don't publish about it, for you to know what's going on, that would have seemed a lot more overwhelming than what the job actually was. When you became an executive editor, you found your ways to get that sort of information. And, when you put your foot down and told the EW, it didn't matter, that you were a woman, or the EW was, frighteningly political or all male, that there was a certain sense of authority that you carried as executive editor, and there was respect for it.
Yeah, I think I never felt like my gender came in any way in my role. Now that I think about it, like if I hadn't been in the role, I would have expected there to be some sort of gender bias or a gendered experience in some way, but that was really not the case. Like I don't think my interactions would have been very different if the EW had, only women on board, or if I had been male. I think it wouldn't have changed much. And yeah, I did get the information that I required about the EW or about elections, but I think it was more a function of what I thought should be reported on and shouldn't be reported on. So I didn't really get into the nitty-gritties during my tenure, which, yeah, maybe I should have. Maybe it was the right decision. I'm not sure.
That makes complete sense to me. The fact that sometimes, if you really try to think about the role before you start the role, there are things that seem like they are going to be these big obstacles, but in your case, it turned out it really wasn't the case. So, maybe you shouldn't overthink it that much. But
yeah, and in my case, I'm sorry, did I interrupt? Yeah.
No.
So in my case, it was a slightly different experience, right? So even when I was a coordinator in Envisage or the clubs that I was a part of, so back then, it sucks to be saying that back then, but yeah, it was.
I know. Hey, think about me. I graduated 5 years before you.
But back then we had much fewer women in the co-curricular sphere than we see now, which has significantly improved, by the way, right? So, so while I would not say that I would have that because of my gender, certain interactions were different, but I would definitely say that certain things do not come as easy, right? For example, let us say when you're applying for the core position, you need to get fundraise from seniors, and most of these cores would be males, which would mean that all these fundraise sessions, whatever, would happen either in guys hostels or in Zaitun, which is so far away from Sharavati, right? That's just about getting the fundraise. And the second part is, even once you become a core, if you are one of the 2 or 3 female cores on the entire core team, even though people might not treat you differently, or you would get the same space, I mean, honestly, you do not have any challenge in any of that. It still becomes you still live in this bubble of Sharavati and Vindhya mess, right? So all these other co-cores of yours, they would probably be in the same mess. They would probably run into each other in hostels, in Ramu, or any of those areas where you do not frequent as much, right? So just by those multiplied interactions, they have an edge in networking over you. And until and unless you put in the conscious effort into, trying to get out there and, trying to meet people, you get restrained from the kind of network and the kind of circle that you would need to go ahead for a leadership position, especially an elected one in Instea. And I realized this even once I became a co-curricular affairs secretary. This was something that I still needed to be conscious about, because I would see the secretary before me, who was a male. He would meet all these course, etc., in so many informal settings outside of co-team meetings, etc., just by the virtue of the fact that they live in they live in nearby hostels or same hostel, eat at the same mess, or meet each other, run into each other at Himalaya lawns or something. Whereas I would not run into these people as often in an informal setting. So I had to make the conscious effort of going and like just sitting in Zaitun for a while, and like meeting people, trying to meet people outside of a formal or a core team meeting or something work related. So I think I see that as a definite difference, which again, which might have seemed very, very inaccessible if I was not a secretary or not a core. And like just if I were just sitting in Sharav as a freshie, that would have seemed much, much more inaccessible, even though it is not all that difficult and all that big a roadblock, because it can be offset by certain conscious measures.
Right.
Actually,
So,
as Pravallika was speaking, I
yeah.
realized that, maybe it's possible it was not like a gender thing, but it could have been a humanities and social sciences thing that may have created some distance. Because I think, yeah, like probably maybe if like it was a techie executive, they may have gotten along better with EW or like had pre-existing friendships. I think this whole being in HS and like, oh, it's a writing-based, English-based position could have created some distance or some aloofness. Could have been that I was also aloof. It's kind of hard to say now. And also, I think my memory is like a little too fuzzy after 5 years. So I'm trying to think of the details. Also, like a traditional Ramu session, I am eating budgies. So I have added this to our conversation.
No. Budgies are always welcome in every conversation.
Yes.
But so that's actually pretty interesting, because it's not just gender, right? There's a whole host of
Mm-hmm.
identities that we all come to every POR with. It's where we're from, it's what languages we're comfortable speaking in, and all
Yeah.
of these could cause issues with and I don't even want to call them issues, but they present different challenges when it comes to getting along with a team or bonding with a team. So now that both of you had that experience on both sides, right? You worked your way up in these ladders and then finally were at the top. What advice would you have for people who are in some sort of leadership position in Instea to make their team a more hospitable place for people of all sorts of backgrounds and identities joining their team? So in your experience, what were identities that you would associate yourselves with, and what would have been nice? What could an ideal core or a convener have done to make that space more inviting for you?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And I think it's something probably everyone could be more thoughtful about, especially because, like Pravallika was saying, Insta is a place where there are a lot of people who are very talented at things. And it often turns out that people who are already good at something take up that space. So there are lots of people who are interested in exploring and in learning things. But if people who are already very good at it take up that space, that they won't be able to do that. So yeah, I remember being conscious of this when I was selecting my team, maybe not to the extent, I mean, I could have done better, I think, but I remember thinking about this. And like one of the things that comes up with T5E is that it's a very like English writing based thing. So people who aren't already good writers or like super fluent in English would feel probably not very comfortable applying. And I remember like during the reading the applications and like soliciting applications, not ruling people out based on language skills, but looking at their ideas, their leadership skills, the way they thought about things, their level of enthusiasm. Like I actually think in Insta, enthusiasm should count for more than anything else, because
Right.
you want to
And
learn
two was
things.
the
You
only
don't
prerequisite.
absolutely.
Remember that.
And honestly, I find that even now, like when I was applying for like tech internships this summer for this summer, and I pretty much found that the same principle applies in the real world. Like you showing passion and enthusiasm for things is really more important than you having every skill that someone is looking for, because yeah, like you're going to learn things on the go. That's why you're joining that job. So yeah, I think language is one. I remember one more thing I was conscious of is that T5E is usually full of only undergrad students. So I made a lot of effort to recruit PhD and master students as well as correspondents. And they had very different demands on their time. Like they may have had families to take care of, kids. Their research and work schedules were very different. So I could not expect that they would give the sort of time that undergrad students generally have over the day. So sort of had to account for that. Also, yeah, like T5E tends to be fairly gender balanced, so that was not something I had to keep in mind. Um, I think there's also a tendency, definitely in Insta, for people who are like, middle or upper class, upper caste already, who go to a particular set of schools, who speak in a particular way, to take over most of the top positions in things. And I belong to the same group. And I was like an executive at T5E. And there's a tendency because they all tend to network with each other, and then we help each other get roles, and we tell each other what we need to know to like apply and succeed. So I think it would be very useful to have fun day sessions that are accessible to everyone, so that everyone can have access to that information and not just a select group of people. I think with all these things in mind, it would be a lot easier to recruit in a more equitable way, so that people who are interested can join and not people who are already skilled.
In the
Yeah.
know, yeah.
I think
Pravalika,
Isha has covered how to what things to keep in mind while recruiting, right? But there's this whole other aspect of things that you can do as
Yeah.
a person in a position of
right.
responsibility,
Yes.
and a lot of these end up being some really really small acts of
Hmm.
empathy, and like just being conscious and
Mm-hmm.
aware of what others might be thinking or having a constraint on, right? So for me, I guess the biggest diversity aspect came in terms of gender only, because we have extremely gender skewed the skewed gender ratios in the both in the Shastra team as well as in C5, right? And what I noticed as a coordinator and as a super coordinator as well, these were simple things, right? For example, there would be spontaneous plans to go out for a movie or have a team dinner, and everybody will be suddenly okay with it, whereas I would have to go call my parents, get their permission,
Hmm.
and they
Hard
would ask a
relate,
thousand
hard
questions on,
relate.
okay, they would
Yeah.
ask me 1,000 questions on, okay, why are you like, okay, this is a major league, like 20 guys and like 2 girls, and okay, this is
Hmm.
post 9 o'clock, do you really want to go outside, right? So I guess, so when I became a core and a secretary later on, so what I used to keep in mind was to make the work sessions. So I used to try having meetings in like equally accessible areas, not all in Zaitun or anything. I used to, I made it a point to have a bunch of meetings near CCD and like library, because even though it's just symbolic, it's still a barrier in a lot of minds, right?
Yeah.
And then simple things where I used to try to have all the team group events or team bonding events more accessible to everybody, so not at really odd hours, so that the girls would also be comfortable and in joining, and
Hmm.
not to very very far off random places, right? So just these simple acts of consciousness also pull in a lot of that would also make a huge difference for someone in the team, is what I realized.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I remember at some point in my tenure, like realizing that there is no need to be hard on people for small things. Like we are not running a company, we don't need to be like strict. So whenever, like there would be cases where people would skip an assignment or like miss an interview or something because they were sick. Sometimes it was like period cramps, things like that. And I think from somewhere I had the impression that you're supposed to punish these sorts of things, and I did not want to. So I just decided it does not matter. Like it's one article or one interview. Who cares in the grand scheme of things? These things are fine. So I remember making that decision, but this is the kind of thing you should probably ask my team. Like maybe they have a very different memory of what I was like.
No,
that I
I
don't
was
know.
in your team and I had a great time.
I know.
So
Yeah, I'm just thinking, but I also remember that I struggled a lot with the idea of like being harsh to someone who was not doing any work over a long period of time, because like I felt it's not fair to people who are putting in a lot of work regularly. So I had to figure out a way to say, it looks like you're very busy with other things or like not able to finish all of this. So instead of saying like I'm firing you or something like that, like it was more like a conversation where um, I was like, yeah, it's okay. Like, why don't you take a break? If you feel like you can give this much minimum time, then come back and join, or like let's do this when you're more free, more
right.
able to do this. I think there's a lot of space to be less harsh and more kind in general in PRs and Instea. It can be a very hyped up, stressful, pressure pot kind of situation. I remember that's how I thought of like interviews when I was interviewing for the editor position in my second year. There's a lot of stress, like you're preparing for an interview, people are going to question you, they're going to catch you out. There's no need for that to be the environment. Like you can be nice and kind and ask your questions and still recruit really excellent people. Same with the way you run teams and the way you treat everyone. So yeah, I don't like the way that Instea has become more of a pressure cooker over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
take
No, I
ourselves
agree.
very
exactly.
seriously.
As you mentioned that, I was reminded of there was a subset of Instea that subscribed to that um, trial by fire, stressful
Yeah,
interview process that they just thought it
yeah,
was just like completely essential. Um,
yeah,
that you had to have like a super stressful like 4-hour interview. And I remember when I
yeah,
think at some point I was telling my parents that I needed to conduct interviews for T5E Exec Ed or something, and I said, I'm doing like 3 hours with each person. They were like, in the real world where you get jobs, where you get paid money, the interviews are not 3 hours long. Like, what are you guys
yeah.
doing there?
I had
But
a very sorry, go ahead.
no, but I mean, of course, even if the interviews are long, it's fine. But I do think that that sort of mindset of just like I need to grill this person. That was the word, the grilling.
Correct.
I don't know if that's
I think
super
people take a lot
effective.
of pleasure in this in Instea in like being cruel to others. It's completely unnecessary, And
Yeah.
this is a place where we can discuss the more masculine culture of like doing things. I don't think it's necessary. I think we can have a very good system without behaving that way. And yeah, I remember something similar. Like in my second year, I was interviewing for like different PORs, and I was really stressed out because I ate something at Guru, which is not there anymore. Oh no. And yeah, and like I was so stressed because I'd be like 3 minutes or 5 minutes late to some interview, and I was walking with some seniors, and they were like, "What is wrong with you? Why do you care? Like, why are you taking this so seriously? What is happening for all of you?" And like, yeah, 5 years later, I'm also like, why is everyone taking this so seriously, taking themselves so seriously?
Right.
It's like you said, it's not, this is the one time you aren't in the real world and where there are no consequences to like slacking off or missing something or making some mistakes. So it's
Right.
fine.
Right. So from there, let's just take a little bit of a detour to your personal experiences in these leadership positions. So having been through that entire experience, what do you think it added to you as a person? Would you recommend that people take up leadership at some scale, if not at the highest scale?
Looking back now, and I have had enough time to think about all of this, right? I do not regret any of the decisions that I took, right? Even though it definitely takes a huge toll on you physically, mentally, and emotionally, and it's a huge chunk of your time as well, right? But even then, I would definitely say that net I had a positive for it. It was positive for me because from someone who was not very extroverted, who was very shy and scared of speaking in public, etc., to now where I'm confident enough uh, to speak, not just in terms of speaking, but also just the fact that having run such a huge fest and having coordinated such different kinds of stakeholders, putting out fires, both literal and figurative. Yeah, both literal and figurative, and just handling such different kinds of people with different mindsets. Because as a secretary, you're not just managing students, right? You're also doing some upward management in the form of talking to your dean of students, handling the faculty advisors expectations and the whole admin part of things, right? So having done all of that gives me a lot of confidence in life in general, so much so that even now when I have a tough day, whether it's at work or with anything, I sit back and think that, okay, you know what, if I could get Shastra up and running, even though there was crazy rains, even though there was some fire, some last minute sponsor backed out, there was crunch in money, etc., if I could still pull it all off together, with along with balancing courses and placements and all of that, then maybe this might not be as difficult. You know what, I can get through this also, just like I got through that. So it still remains like a huge what do I call it, like a milestone in my life, which I look back to and think that, okay, if I could get past that, I can definitely do this as well. Because for me it represents a huge trajectory, where from where I was in my first year to what I became capable of doing in my fifth year. So that always represents that trajectory to me, which has definitely helped me in being more confident, which definitely flowed into the way I carry myself, right? Even in terms of placements, the way I carried myself in interviews, and even a lot of people definitely have this whole notion that PORs would eat a lot of time. I would not have enough time for my courses, etc. At least in my experience, what I felt that having that extra piece of work that I needed to do, which I knew was going to take a lot of time out of my schedule, made me, in fact, forced me to put down a rigid and like
Yeah.
a proper plan for
Yeah.
myself in that semester. I have always seen that my POR semesters, my CGPA, my GPA was much, much better than the
Yeah.
non-POR
Yeah.
semester,
Hmm.
which is so counterintuitive. Um, so just because I knew that I have this extra piece of thing that needs this certain amount of attention, and I know that all of this is gonna come at a certain time in my semester, I plan things ahead. I ensure that my assignments are all like in time, or that I know when I need to start preparing for my quizzes, etc. So that made me put down a schedule on things, right? So I do not think that it affected me in any negative way in terms of how much time I ended up devoting to the things that I wanted to do. And thirdly, even though it's very exhaustive, like I said, physically, emotionally, all of the way, it again still helps you test your limits. That's what I realized, that it helped me understand how much I could really expand, how much I could really expand, and like what all I could really do. And I would not have imagined doing all of that. So it was really, really pushing yourself out of the comfort zone, which I think you would not really get to do outside in the real life. Because in Insta, what's the worst that would happen if you fail? It's fine. It's okay. Maybe instead of 90 lakhs sponsorship amount, you raise only 80 lakhs. In the grand scheme of things, having done all of that now, it doesn't matter a lot. Just the fact that you realize that day what your breaking point could be, or just the fact that you tested yourself of how thin you can spread out, that that is what is like a huge learning, at least for me. in terms of self-realization and all that philosophical jazz.
No, it
Oh my
seems
God,
to
I
me,
agree with.
yeah, like what you were saying, Pravallika, is very much like what I think of for JE. And whenever like academically I feel challenged, I'm like, wait a minute, if I could do that. But then the
Yeah.
whole leadership aspect of this is, with COCAS now you get to do that. If I could do that in two very different ways, the academics were always set. And then now, you can draw upon the confidence that being the COCAS brought to you with all the workplace challenges probably that you have now.
Yes.
But yeah, Isha, you were saying.
Can you just repeat your question? I just want to make sure I'm not forgetting any part of my answer.
Right. So what did it add to you as a person? And would you recommend that people do it, even if not at the highest scale, at whatever level they find fit for themselves?
Yeah, I was saying that I agree with every word Pravallika said. It's very, very true. These kind of positions can be very demanding, but they're also rewarding on the same level. And like I remember Purna saying that T5E was a very superlative experience for her. I feel the same way. I think of all the things I've done till now in Instea and outside Instea, I count T5E as the most transformational by far, which is very surprising if you think about it. But yeah, I think it basically showed me that I can lead people or lead a team or manage a team, none of which I would have considered before. And it was also a very different style of leadership. Like I was not shouting at people or um, doing things in the way I had seen leadership at Instea work out. I was not that kind of person. But I thought that I was successful at handling T5E and publishing a lot during my tenure. And I just had a lot of ideas and I was very passionate about them. I remember just doing a lot of things from scratch. Like, I think we had our first ever official budget and we sort of presented that at SLC, just figuring out financing, publicity, budgets, how to sort of make sure everything's on track, organizing everyone's work, following 50 people and their work and making sure everyone's working together, intra-team dynamics, um, making sure there's not like a huge sense of hierarchy or like any kind of domination in that sense going on, interacting with everybody, all of these other stakeholders and bodies in Instea on a regular basis, from the dean to our FACAD to people we were writing about to the EW to the student sort of body in general. There was just it was like 50 jobs rolled into one, and I didn't know how to do any of those jobs before I took up the role, and I enjoyed every bit of it so much. So I think after T5E, I was not as underconfident and I had a much better sense of my abilities, and also a lot more, yeah, definitely a lot more confidence. I didn't think of myself as a super shy, super incapable person anymore. But I would also say that, maybe you don't have to do these huge leadership things to get that feeling. I don't know if that's strictly necessary. So in terms of recommending it to people, I know that like executive experiences have gone both ways. For some people, it's been this kind of very rewarding experience. For some people, it's been very, very difficult, very challenging. And that's not because of them, but because of the kind of environment in Instea as a whole. It's become a lot more constricting over time. I've seen this in recent years. I think the environment for things like free publishing or experimentation or even just trying out ideas without facing a lot of backlash, that environment is disappearing. So I think that people in leadership roles have more to manage now than I did, for sure. Like even the year that I graduated, within 1 to 2 years of that, there was a lot of political backlash on T5E at every step, and I know how difficult that was on the teams that had to handle it. And T5E is also in a very unique position in Instea in the sense that it's had a fairly adversarial role with the administration. Usually, like we've had to negotiate for a lot of press freedoms or like things like that. It's not always a positive relationship, and that's not very easy to bear. So yeah, so I wouldn't say yeah, everyone should do this, everyone's going to discover amazing things. It may happen or it may not. And that's where I think everyone in Insta kind of has a responsibility to keep that environment alive, because we should all have a chance to have that kind of experience where we are not constantly worried about like all the criticisms we're going to get for every single action. And politically, this goes both ways. Each side thinks this about the other, but yeah, I do see the space disappearing. It is worrying. So I don't know what advice to give to people, because I feel like my experiences are fairly outdated. But yeah, I hope that this
Right.
is something people can experience.
Like, I think even with leadership, even though both of you sort of touched upon the same themes about how it transformed you as a person and stuff like that, the nature of both of your roles was so different. And I think that's the key takeaway really, is if you want to gain these skills, you don't have to be a T5E exec ed if that sort of job role does not align with your interests. There's a whole host of leadership roles out there with different demands, and as it turns out, once you go through that sort of a process, it seems to be transformational to the same degree, um, irrespective of whether you were the COCAS or the academic affairs secretary or the T5E exec ed. So,
Yeah.
pick and choose whatever stresses fancy you the best.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I just wanted to add that I remember during my tenure, I had never used my phone that much. Like I was constantly on my phone texting,
Oh my
because
God,
all of
so
our,
relatable.
yeah, like everything. We had WhatsApp groups for like every group and every
Yeah.
article, remember? And like, so it was just, and okay, I do have one piece of advice for people who are in leadership roles, and that is to learn to delegate, which I did not do very well. This is why you have a team structure with like lots of people to distribute all these tasks. I think I was a bit of a control freak. Like I wanted everything to be perfect. So I felt like I needed to be in on everything. And over the year, I learned to delegate better and to sort of not feel responsible for every tiny thing going on everywhere in the team. Um, but it was hard because I felt the benefits of doing that. For example, I felt like it was very important for me to personally know every single person on the team, to like know everybody's names from the first day onwards, to set up like systems of review, like set up so many things. Um, and now I'm like, yeah, it was really nice that you did that. And I would still do it again. But yeah, this is not a neat lesson. So I guess I don't have a very neat takeaway. But yeah, these are things that have trade offs. Like you just have to decide where you fall on these things.
And
Speaking
that's
of,
the beauty of the thing, right?
yeah,
And
sorry.
because it's
Yeah,
an Insta and because it's such a like it is low stakes. I think we can say
Yeah,
that
yeah,
now. It is low
of
stakes,
course.
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
you
yeah.
can actually afford to make mistakes, and then like you think back and like think about the things that you could have done or could not have done, right? We all have these ideas retrospectively now, but just the fact that we were able to experiment and try out what works and what does not work for us, that itself is a huge pro, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I think one more like huge pro of this kind of thing is just getting to work in a team that big. It's such a pleasure.
Yeah.
Like it is so nice to hear everyone's ideas and work with so many people and to be able to draw on so many different kinds of talent. Like that, aside from all the maybe more personal or selfish reasons to take up leadership roles, which are are gaining more currency in these days, like I think this is a
Hmm.
really good reason. Like it's a very unique type of experience. You can really gain so much from that kind of collaboration if you go about it a certain way. Yeah.
So speaking
Yeah.
of these roles being so all-consuming, um, I know that it's probably close to impossible to hide being the co-cast or being the T5E executive editor from your parents. And equally, it's probably very difficult to hide all the stresses that you take on in these leadership roles from the phone calls that you make back home. So, how did you handle that aspect of explaining to your parents that you wanted to do this, why it was worth it, and explaining to them the whole Instea machinery, because it's so hard to understand when you're not there, why a certain thing is just so earth-shatteringly bad, or why this is worth putting the amount of time that you're putting into it. So how did you navigate that dynamic?
This is a very interesting question. I don't know if like this was we thought of it that way, or like I didn't think of it this way. I tend to be an oversharer, and the thought that this is a thing that you're supposed to hide or manage, that wasn't really there. Like I said things, I didn't say things. I didn't feel the need to manage it in a particular way. Maybe it's different for people who are day scholars or who are sort of in very close proximity to these things. But yeah, I relied a lot on my hostel wingmates and my boyfriend to keep me sane. Um, they were brilliant. Yeah, and I did share enough at home, and I don't think it was like something I had to defend or justify being the exec ed. Of course, your parents can sense when you're overworked, but in Insti, honestly, we generally seem overworked all the time, I think. So I don't know, it's very easy to distinguish like shades of these things. But I think usually like people in these roles enjoy their roles or like enjoy some aspects of their roles. So that's also something that people at home would pick up on. So yeah, I don't think I face any conflicts on this.
Right. What about you,
Yeah, I
Pravallika?
think, yeah, I didn't have to explain myself too much actually to my parents either, with the whole decision of elections. And it's also probably partly because they did not understand the whole, the whole side of it, which is really hard to explain anyway to someone outside of the Insta machinery, right? So like Isha said, even I used to rely a lot more on my close group of friends and wingmates to keep myself sane. But coming to the point of how do you justify yourself if you are asked with the question that, okay, why are you doing this, something which is non-acads, which is taking up so much of your time. So at least the way I not justified, but the way I responded to that was in the fact that at least my parents very easily saw that it's not Insta is just not about doing a bunch of courses, getting a couple of grades and getting out of there, right? So it was very easy for me to put it across to my parents that what, it's these kind of things that give the other aspects that you need to grow as a person, right? Because this is definitely the last chance that you get as an undergrad in a college. That's the last chance you get to pick up all these skills. And beyond Insti, you do not get to experiment a lot. You do not get to change your personality a lot because you're pretty much set in your ways. At least that's what I'm thinking. But so that was so that's why it was easy for me to explain to my parents. And when they saw that I was actually really passionate about this, they did not really, it was not really an obstacle or a constraint. I never saw it that way. So I had pretty much of a good support. Maybe it was because of lack of information, or maybe, or
Yeah, I just
maybe
realized
they really understood.
this is one more place where the difference is due to my program and not so much the parents because I didn't like if I had had the same kind of pressure that the average BTech student would face, or if I had a lot of pressure to find a job right after Insti, I would have been in a very different position. So that's probably why I did not like this was not something that came up for me.
Yeah, that does make sense.
So one last question before maybe we close up this episode. So what would you say to a freshie or a second year, someone super young in Insti, who maybe comes to you and is curious about the leadership space, but is hesitant and a little afraid to maybe get to put themselves out there or to get involved in political things? What is like a short message that you would give them from your experience?
I would say that there's no need per se to get really intimidated by the political scene or whatever, right? At least, especially when you're a freshie. I would just give the same advice that somebody gave to me, which is do what you like in that moment and not try to control and curate every little thing that you do in Insta. Because when you do the things that you like, you automatically start gaining the confidence and the kind of support that you need. So basically the stage gets set automatically. So if you so I think we started on this when we started the podcast, that looking back, everything looks like a very well coherent planned story, even though it was not. But it just ends up being so because you do the things that you like, and in some way they make the person that you become. So I would say just focus on what you like and really go for it, and ignore everything else is pretty much background noise, is what I would say.
And
Yeah,
you,
that's
Isha?
good advice. Yeah, I'm incapable of short answers. I think I would speak to the person I mean, I've done this before with like um juniors who want to apply for the executive position. I would just speak to them for a while and figure out, their motivations for applying, what they're worried about. I would I would give them responses based on their personality, because each person has different worries that they come in with, and there are different answers for that. um Short answers, I don't know. I think I would like to say, to current students to like go for what they feel is right, irrespective of political pressures. But I don't think it's very useful advice at the moment, because these things can really really destroy people's peace of mind. Sometimes, like, there's just this whole Insta machinery that comes down on you. So I think I would say protect yourself in the way that works for you, whether that means going full on your POR and doing everything that you want, whether it means taking a break and leaving the POR because that's best for you, or whether it means like thinking of some sort of solution, bringing in some sort of help, splitting your POR with somebody else. There are lots of ways to figure out how to reduce the load, and I think
Right.
that's not something people should feel like they can't do. Um,
Right.
Especially now that there is so much more like average pressure on people, like that amount has seems to have increased a lot. People seem much more worried about their future after Insta. Um, Much more, I think, just feeling like they need to do a lot more while at Insta, and a lot of these are these idealistic images that most people can't achieve in practice. So yeah, I would just say try things and please be prepared to ditch it or to take some weird route, whatever you need to.
Right. So before we end this episode, I have a few rapid fire questions for both of you. So all the listeners and the viewers get to know a little bit more about you as people. And hopefully we end the episode on a super light, breezy note. So let me just get started. So the first question is, tell us about a moment when you felt someone really had your back in Insta.
It's really hard to think of specific moments, but I panicked a lot in Instea, and especially while I was executed, and I would just run back to my hostel wing, and they had my back every single time. Yeah.
Yeah, I
You,
would
Pravalika?
actually, for me, the most that feel that I got was when I was contesting the elections, right? So when I started off with the campaigning and the whole manifesto process, I was very bad at campaigning. I used to answer questions very weirdly and all of that. But I had this whole bunch of people who were, what, you did well. You just need to tweak this a little bit. You need to answer that question a little bit differently, and they were so supportive, and that got me through the whole process. Otherwise I think I would have quit the first day after my first campaigning round. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think that was the time when I felt the most supported.
I think wingmates have this like beautiful combination of unnecessary bluntness and blind faith. Like, it's a very good combination, and it usually results in a lot of laughter, but it also works to like
Yeah.
keep you going.
What was your antidote to a rough day in Insta?
I think for me it was one of two things. It was either a walk, either alone or with my boyfriend in Instea, or it was going back to hostel, ordering some food, and all of us watching a movie. Like these things, or just us eating at mess at the end of the day and like sharing all the things that happened. Um, I think these were just things that instantly cheered you up. And Instea walks are just we've all been there, alone or with someone. They have a particular effect.
Yeah, for me, it was just like I would, after a really tough or rough day, I would just walk back to my wing, like knock the door of my neighbor. And I was so fortunate that that door was always open for me. And I would just go and vent it all out. It was either that or I used to just go to my room, blast some music and like order some good food. So
Yeah,
yeah, one of these two.
I still remember like all of my wingmates' most tatty clothes, which is what they were most likely to be in at the end of a long day. Because that's when you like bang on someone's door and just take over their bed and like get
Yeah.
some crap to eat. Yeah, I remember all the outfits.
And maybe the last question. What was your most outlandish monkey encounter while you were in Instea?
Ooh.
Okay, I have a horrible one. That was exactly once in 5 years that I decided to volunteer at Blue Cross with like puppies and stuff. So I go to this thing, I come back, and there's a conference in my department. So if you go from the backside to the HS department, you have to climb 2 flights of stairs to get there, and the conference room was there. So I walked up the first flight of stairs, and there were like 50 monkeys. Okay, I was dead, and I was smelling like a dog. So that was it. I had monkeys dropping on my head from the floor above. They were on my back. They were like on my knees. I was like, I just froze. And then I think I tried to run up the stairs, just both brave and stupid. And then I found myself on the first floor landing where there were dozens of monkeys everywhere. There must have
No.
been at least 50. That point, I lost it. I was like, this. I tried to be, brave or whatever, but there were just too many. So I started yelling. And then two of my extremely brave friends came with these sticks out of the conference room, somehow like chased those things away. I ran up and I probably interrupted the conference speaker and disrupted the proceedings. But yeah, that was the worst. They were just every direction on me.
Oh my God, that's scary. That is scary.
Yeah. I mean,
I
now
did
to
I
go
did not
after
volunteer
Isha,
again.
to go after Isha now, mine seems very, chuma only. But mine was okay. In my second year, we were in Sharavati. So, since Sharavati was still undergoing renovation, only the second years were the only ones in that entire semester. And it was one of those extremely heavy, rainy days. The ones where the entire road to Sag gets completely filled. You have like knee deep water outside Sharav, and like Sarayu and Mandak are already like gone. It was one of those nights. And so my room was on the top floor, and I had gone out to get water or something, and I got cornered by like 4 or 5 monkeys, and one of them was this baby teeny tiny monkey which was playing tag with me, and I was literally in a corner. It was coming and like tapping my feet and going away when I screamed, and it was just having a whole fun out of it. And because it was raining so heavily, nobody was able to hear my screams.
Oh
And
no.
Oh
and
no.
I and like suddenly someone in that wing had opened the door for some other reason, and they saw my plight, and like they came with like some broom and all and tried to save me from there. But yeah, I mean, it's not as scary as yours, Isha, but yeah.
It's still pretty bad.
No,
I
really.
know like monkey anecdotes just start like a flood of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to mention one more, which is that in first year, my friend brought this like meticulously made huge bottle of like heavy like herbal hair oil. Like her mom had made it for her. It smelled really intense, and monkeys used to break into our rooms all the time if we left them unlocked. So yeah, once we came back from class, and there was a monkey in her room, and it was chugging that bottle. And I don't know if it survived. Seems unlikely, but then these monkeys are like pretty indestructible.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Destroyed. All of that work got destroyed in seconds.
I have that visual in my head. Right?
Yeah, I'm just imagining a monkey chugging hair oil.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So maybe the note we should end on is that there are many things that you could think are terrifying about leadership, but nothing nearly as terrifying as when 50 monkeys descended upon Isha. So if you think you have it in you, which you most certainly do, go for it. And then take care of yourself while you're in the process. So yeah,
and nothing you do will ever be as bad as those 15 monkeys. Like it's going to be a lot easier than that.
Right. All right, then thank you so much, Pravallika and Isha, for joining me on this episode. And yeah, here's your reminder to subscribe to this podcast, wherever that button is. All right.
I just want to say one more thing, which is I want to apologize to any viewers/listeners if they get bothered by sounds of people chewing. I enjoyed my snack a lot, but I want to apologize in case crunching was too loud.
We respect the budgie. Always respect the budgie.
Yes.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.